In the early morning hours of March 19th, Iran reported launching Khorramshahr 4 ballistic missiles toward central Israel. Each missile carried a warhead capable of fragmenting into 24 separate bomblets, dispersing across roughly 5 miles of terrain below, striking homes, roads, and military positions without distinction. The IRGC officially designated this as Wave 64 of Operation True Promise 4, describing it as the most extensive coordinated strike package since the conflict began. 80 military and military support targets across Israel, from Eilat in the south to Haifa in the north, all hit within a single concentrated timeframe, not spread across days. Israel has publicly claimed it has destroyed over 70% of Iran's ballistic missile launch infrastructure. That figure now raises serious questions. Either the assessment was inaccurate, or Iran maintained hidden reserves that survived the entire campaign, and the missiles were only part of what happened. Hezbollah launched synchronized salvos into northern Israel simultaneously. The IRGC claimed strikes against the U.S. Navy's Fifth Fleet in Bahrain, and across the Gulf, from Qatar to Kuwait to Saudi Arabia, energy infrastructure was set ablaze. Over the next few minutes, this breakdown will cover what Iran unleashed, why Israeli air defenses are struggling to keep up, and where this conflict appears to be heading. What we know, the IRGC labeled these operations as Waves 63 and 64 of Operation True Promise 4. Wave 63 carried the codename Sahib al-Zaman, dedicated to the memory of Intelligence Minister Ismail Qani, killed in an earlier U.S.-Israeli strike. The IRGC's public statement said its forces set fire to a series of oil facilities considered American interests in the region. The language is deliberate. Not Israeli interests, American interests. Iran is sending Washington a direct message: Gulf energy infrastructure tied to U.S. stakeholders is now a permanent category of targets. Wave 64 focused on different objectives. Ben Gurion Airport, described by the IRGC as a central hub for combat operations and logistics. Haifa, identified as a concentration point for troops and refinery infrastructure. Rishon LeZion, a city of over 250,000 people in central Israel. And aerial refueling tankers, a target that carries significant strategic weight. Destroying Israel's refueling fleet would directly limit the range of 3 jets conducting deep strike missions into Iranian territory. No tankers means those long-range operations become far more difficult to execute. The IRGC also reported strikes against the Fifth Fleet headquarters in Bahrain using medium-range missiles running on both liquid and solid fuel. Bahrain has intercepted close to 300 missiles and drones since the war began, a remarkable volume for a single small Gulf nation. The Khorramshahr portion. What most coverage misses, this is where the tactical picture becomes genuinely important and where most reporting falls short. When people hear multi-warhead missile, they typically imagine a weapon splitting into 2 or 3 pieces near impact. The Khorramshahr 4 operates on a different scale entirely. A single warhead can release up to 24 individual bomblets, each carrying roughly 11 pounds of high explosive. They scatter across a radius of up to 5 miles, raining down at high velocity onto whatever lies below, with no ability to distinguish military assets from civilian areas. Independent field analysis of 2 separate Khorramshahr 4 strikes confirmed impact patterns spread across 7 and 8 miles respectively, with random distribution throughout. The missile itself stands 13 meters tall and weighs 20 tons at launch. It runs on hypergolic liquid fuel that can remain stored in tanks for years, reducing launch preparation to roughly 12 minutes. In flight, it reaches Mach 16 above the atmosphere and Mach 8 within it. The warhead separates during the terminal descent phase, meaning by the time it enters the target zone, any interceptor is chasing a detached object moving at extraordinary velocity. The Khorramshahr 4 also incorporates a mid-course guidance system that corrects its trajectory while above the atmosphere, in a phase entirely beyond the reach of ground-based electronic warfare. Analysts trace the missile's lineage back to North Korea's Hwasong-10, itself a descendant of the Soviet R-27 submarine-launched ballistic missile. Decades of engineering inform this weapon. Why Israel's defenses are struggling. Arrow intercepts ballistic missiles at high altitude and does so effectively. But even a successful Arrow intercept may not stop the bomblets, because the submunitions released before the missile body is destroyed, or because the intercept angle isn't direct. Once the bomblets are free, they are small, fast, and descending from the stratosphere. Israeli defense analysts say the only reliable solution is intercepting the parent missile as early and as high as possible, ideally with Arrow 3, before the submunitions separate. Once they're loose, the problem becomes drastically harder, and in practical terms may no longer be solvable mid-flight. One missile expert who advises Israeli defense companies put it plainly, calling cluster munitions a mechanism to bypass active missile defense. He also noted that Iran appears to be leaning harder into cluster warheads precisely because its overall missile inventory has been depleted by U.S. and Israeli strikes. With fewer launchers available, each missile must deliver maximum damage. The cluster warhead is the logical answer to that equation. An Israeli military official acknowledged on the record that the country's air defenses rank among the best in the world, then immediately added that the system is not airtight. When an active official tells you the shield has gaps, the gaps are real. Iran is now equipping roughly half of every ballistic missile salvo with cluster warheads, and the consequences are visible on the ground. 2 construction workers were killed in Yehud near Tel Aviv, caught outdoors on a job site, An elderly couple in their 70s were found dead in Ramat Gan, just outside their safe room. A 30-year-old foreign worker was killed in Moshav Adanim by cluster shrapnel. 3 Palestinian women were killed in the West Bank by Iranian missiles, the first fatalities in that territory since the conflict began. By Thursday, wire services were reporting at least 15 people killed inside Israel since the war started, with additional deaths reported separately in the West Bank. The defense is not airtight. That phrase keeps being proven correct. The Northern Front coordination, not freelancing what the IRGC executed simultaneously along the northern border with Hezbollah, is what transforms this from a missile story into a full strategic crisis. On March 11th, the IRGC publicly confirmed that Wave 40 of Operation True Promise 4 was, in their own words, a joint coordinated operation between the Revolutionary Guards and the Lebanese resistance. That was the first time Iran openly acknowledged real-time operational synchronization with Hezbollah during this war. The pattern on March 18th and 19th made that coordination unmistakable. While Iranian ballistic missiles struck central and southern Israel, Hezbollah launched simultaneous salvos into Haifa and Nahariya and across the Galilee, averaging 100 rockets per day, oftentimes to land in the same window as Iranian launches. The objective is not symbolic, it is architectural. Saturate every layer of Israeli air defense from every direction simultaneously. Force the system to make choices about what gets intercepted and what gets through. Estimates suggest Hezbollah still holds roughly 25,000 missiles, 10,000 drones, and thousands of elite Radwan fighters. Since early March, the group has claimed over 280 separate attack waves. Israel has responded with more than 2 to 50 strikes across Lebanon, with ground forces pushing south of the Litani River. Over 1 million Lebanese have been displaced, nearly 20% of the country's entire population. The death toll has surpassed 968, including more than 100 children. Major General Rafi Milo, commander of Israel's Northern Command, called Hezbollah's return to active fighting a serious mistake, but followed that assessment with a warning that strikes would continue and intensify. That is not the language of a commander expecting a swift conclusion. The energy dimension, the part that should worry you most on March 18th, Israel struck Iran's South Pars gas field, the single largest natural gas reserve on the planet, shared between Iran and Qatar beneath the Persian Gulf. Iranian President Pezeshkian warned of consequences he described as uncontrollable and capable of engulfing the entire world. Within hours, the IRGC retaliated against energy infrastructure across the Gulf under the Wave 63 designation. Qatar's Ras Laffan Industrial City, the largest LNG production facility on Earth, responsible for approximately 20% of global liquefied natural gas supply, took direct missile hits. Qatar Energy reported significant fires and extensive structural damage. Production at Ras Laffan had already been suspended since March 2nd following earlier drone strikes. Energy analysts now estimate that this latest round of damage could delay any restart by more than 2 months. Saudi Arabia's Yanbu refinery on the Red Sea was struck, significant because the Saudis had been redirecting oil exports west through the Red Sea specifically to bypass the closed Strait of Hormuz. Iran hit the detour route. 2 Kuwaiti oil refineries were set on fire. The UAE's Habshan gas facility and Bab field in Abu Dhabi were forced offline. Qatar expelled Iran's military attaches and gave them 24 hours to leave the country. Saudi Arabia's top diplomat stated publicly that whatever trust existed before has been completely destroyed. Brent crude briefly surged toward $1.18 a barrel and was trading around $1.13 by Thursday. European gas prices jumped roughly 25% in a single day and are now more than 60% above where they stood when the war began. The IRGC's follow-up statement was explicit. If this is repeated, subsequent attacks on your energy infrastructure and that of your allies will not cease until total destruction. That is not rhetorical posturing. That is an operational declaration. Trump responded by threatening to destroy South Pars if Iran continued targeting Gulf energy. 3 Israeli officials told Reuters the South Pars strike was coordinated with Washington, despite Trump publicly claiming the United States had no prior knowledge. Both of those statements cannot simultaneously be true, and that contradiction tells you something important about how distorted the information environment around this war has become. The bigger picture, the Pentagon has requested over $200 billion in war funding from Congress. The Strait of Hormuz remains effectively closed. Roughly 20% of global oil and 20% of global LNG exports transit through it. 13 U.S. service members have been killed across the region. The U.S. has struck more than 7,000 targets inside Iran. Iran reports over 444 dead, including an estimated 450 women and children. The IRGC also noted that more than 5 million Israeli residents have been confined to shelters for extended periods since Wave 63 began. Israel's own health ministry has urged citizens to move to bomb shelters carefully after reports of people injuring themselves in the rush. Schools are closed. Parliament is barely operational. The Israeli ombudsman declared the shortage of adequate shelters in the north an urgent danger requiring immediate action. And yet public support for the war among Israelis remains strong. People report feeling they are engaged in an existential fight, even from inside reinforced rooms. That psychological gap between physical disruption and popular resolve is one of the most consequential dynamics of this conflict, because it determines how long a democracy can sustain a military campaign while its population lives underground. What this actually is, most observers are still framing this as a missile exchange. What actually unfolded on March 18th and 19th is something fundamentally different the moment this conflict stopped being primarily about military targets and became an energy war with global economic consequences that no party fully controls. Iran's missile launchers are supposedly 70% destroyed, its air defense is reportedly 85% neutralized, and yet it just executed a synchronized 80-target barrage across the full length of Israel, while simultaneously igniting Gulf energy infrastructure from Qatar to Kuwait to Abu Dhabi to Saudi Arabia. Either the damage assessments were overstated, or Iran maintained dispersed reserves that survived the entire campaign. Both explanations carry serious implications. Oil above 113, natural gas up over 50%, the Strait of Hormuz closed, 20% of the world's LNG supply offline, the $200 billion requested from Congress. No ceasefire framework proposed by any party. No definition of what victory looks like from any capital involved. The only question that actually matters, what does winning look like when the global economy is absorbing the cost, remains publicly unanswered by everyone involved. And that silence should concern anyone paying attention.